Hello and welcome to another episode of Valley Sports Telegram presents This Sports Telegram. Like we keep saying, we're going to keep putting these out there as often as we can, trying to give you our views on what's going on. I hope you enjoyed our NBA Finals preview. And we've got one more finals, and that's the NHL Finals, the Stanley Cup Finals. There's some interesting storylines in this one. We've got a new team. They're what, 6 years old, something like that. And we've got the Panthers, who've been around for a while. There's a lot of kind of storylines on both sides and different things we can look at. But before we get into it, Kenny, how you doing?
I'm doing great, man. It's a fun time. It's an exciting time. Reaching the end of the spring, going into the summer, and what that means on the professional sports level is we've got two different final series to kind of chomp and break down into. The NBA Finals one we kind of broke down, and now we're looking at the battle for Lois Stanley's Cup. And it's an interesting matchup here with these two franchises in terms of one, how we've arrived here with these two teams, the roads they've taken to sort of cement themselves as being worthy challengers for the Cup. And on one side, when you're talking about the Florida Panthers and a team that barely got in, but once they got in, they dominated the competition in the East. And on the other side in the West, a Golden Knights team that, quite frankly, is already sort of establishing themselves just in 6 years of their existence as being one of the premier franchises in the NHL. This is their first time getting back to the Cup since their magical run in their first year of expansion. But we've got stars on both sides. We've got two good goalies on both sides, and it's going to be a fun matchup.
Well, yeah, with that, we'll jump right into it. The Vegas Golden Knights had the best record in the Western Conference, home ice throughout. They were challenged. There was a moment Edmonton thought they might be able to pass them a little earlier than that. There was a moment the Kings thought they might be able to pass them. But Vegas kept playing well as the season went on, and they held on over the last couple games to have that best record in the West. Florida, on the other hand, needed a lot of help to get in. Yes, they got hot. They started winning games in the end, but they needed help. And Pittsburgh seemed more than happy to help them, deciding they didn't want to win any games over the last 2 weeks of the season. And it came down to the last day. Florida won, Pittsburgh lost. And Florida was the 8th seed, the last team in. That is about where these differences stop. Both teams have played really well in the playoffs. You have to get here. But their numbers are very, very similar. And it's not like you have a fluky kind of appearance. And we could say Florida in 96, when they lost to Colorado, that might have been because they didn't come back at all. They just disappeared. And Vegas has been the beneficiary of the expansion rules, and this is their second finals appearance. They've been to the conference finals 3 times, and they're built to last currently. So it'll be interesting to see how this one shakes out. Before I get into any of the details, though, what are your first impressions?
My first impressions are that this is a series to me that's intriguing because when you look at these two teams, it's not a fluke to how they got here. They're very similar in terms of their style of play, which initially kind of gives you hope that this could be a very fun, entertaining back and forth series just because of the way the teams play style wise. But when you look at the two rosters, it is interesting, right? You're talking about a team in Florida that the Jonathan Huberdeau and company from last season, they had one of the best regular seasons we had seen in the modern era. And because they they went out in flames in the first round, the front office essentially blew that entire thing up and sort of took a different direction, bringing in a Matthew Tkachuk and sort of retooling what the core of this roster would be going forward. And now you look at a team that has a pretty young core, guys who hadn't really kind of gotten to this level yet in their career outside of a guy like Eric Stahl, who's a dinosaur who's been here for God knows how long. And this guy's been around so long. He played in the Cup with the Hurricanes in 2006. So like that's essentially that's where the veteran or the experience on this team comes from. The rest of this group, which you would consider the core of that group, they're all experiencing this ride together. And you know what? The best part about it is the front office made decisions. Matthew Tkachuk is signed long term. He's going to be the face of this franchise, and this might be the first of many. What's interesting on the other side is when you look at Vegas, like you were saying, the expansion rules really what we've seen from Vegas, and hell, even to a degree this year with Seattle. The way the expansion rules work, you can hit the ground running as a new franchise. And boy, is that not what Vegas did, reaching a Cup final in their first year. But the thing that's so cool about it is when you look at Marshall and you look at Carlson, these were two guys who were on that team, and they've still been here sort of being the pillars of this franchise to kind of keep things going in that direction. So you have two franchises, which is hilarious that you would look at Vegas only been around for a handful of years as sort of the veteran group, the established group, almost feels like a legacy franchise somehow, even though they've only been around a few years, because they've just been in this position for the most part since they've been in their existence, trying to sort of solidify that initial group and what they built from year one with a cup. So we're either going to have a team sort of put a stamp on a run from the beginning of a franchise, or we're going to have a team win their first cup that might be signifying that this could be the first of a few appearances and maybe the beginnings of a team that might be able to build into a dynasty and be in these conversations of reaching a cup final for years to come. So it's going to be exciting.
It is. It really, really is. And you gave me the perfect segue. The building in Florida of what they're trying to do is reminiscent of a team from 2012. This is not the 2012 hat, by the way. The Kings and Panthers are very, very similar in the way they went about their business. Both teams were coming off of successful seasons prior. They disappointed, and then they made this run and got into the playoffs. And then they got into the playoffs, and something clicked. And when it clicked, they've been unbeatable. The sweep of Carolina just blows me away. But it's funny because in 2012, nobody thought the Kings were going to sweep anybody, and then they swept St. Louis. And so there's that, right? But you look at how they start. They have the experience in goal. They've got the solid decor, right? And now they solidified up the middle and up front. You start from the back and work your way out. And nobody thought it was going to be Bobrovsky until he stood up and did it, right? But they still have pieces there. And to flip to Vegas, they have Marchessault, right? They have Carlson. They brought in Stone that first year. He was a part of the run, even though he wasn't an original.
Yeah.
But who did they add after? Right? They have two key pieces that have two cups. They have Alec Martinez, and he's a real key piece on that blue line.
Mm-hmm.
And their backup goalie in the playoffs is Jonathan Quick, who the whole NHL knows was just unbeatable in 2012. So both of these teams are coming at it from kind of different ways. One is bringing a more veteran experience presence. The other one is we're building this from the ground up, kind of a rebuild getting into it. I think that at the beginning, honestly, this could be anyone's matchup.
Yeah, when you look at the numbers, like I said, in the postseason, both of these teams absolutely earned their way here, and offensively were just explosive, and there's no two ways about it. So when you look at the matchup on paper, yeah, you could make an argument that this thing could go. You could make an argument this could go 7. You could also make an argument based on how Florida's been playing that if they won this thing in 5, you'd be like, oh, that makes sense. They look at what they just did to Carolina, even though Rob Brendamore said it wasn't a sweep. Never mind your math. Never you mind the math. He said that series didn't count as a sweep because of how close it was. Okay, sure. Whatever. Cool. He said it wasn't a sweep. I mean, cool.
Well, technically, they did play 5 games.
Yes, that's why I'm like, all right. Rob Brendamore is the only person I'm going to extend that allow him to say that because of just the sheer amount of ice time that it took to actually put them away. So fine, it wasn't a sweep. Fine. It was, but you could make the argument with how hot Florida is that you could see a scenario in which they would win this series in 5 games. But then when you look at the sheer dominance that the Vegas Golden Knights have shown offensively through these first 3 rounds, and we're not even talking about on a power play. I'm talking about the amount of goals they have scored on the 5-on-5. That if they came and just ran through Florida, you'd be like, okay, it was a great season for Florida, but this is absolutely, you could see a scenario in which Vegas could also run them out of the building. So it's literally a toss-up because there's so many pieces. That's why I think this series ultimately will come down to the X factors, the guys who do the dirty work, who are going to make the difference. And when you're splitting hairs about how well these two teams are playing right now today.
I'm going to split a little bit of hairs because this is you mentioned it and I have it. So Vegas, their offense, they have coming into the finals the 3rd best offense. The first 2, interestingly enough, Boston had 3.86 goals per game. And we all know what happened to them. Thank you, Florida. Edmonton had 3.67 goals per game. And they lost to Vegas. So that 1 and 2 right there, look at who they lost to. And the 3rd team is Vegas at 3.65. And Florida is way down there at 3.13. So the offense is there. Well, if the offense is there, how is it going to work with defense, right? Both of these teams were pretty good defensively. Vegas was, again, a top 5 team in goals against, and they only gave up 2.6 goals, 2.65, right? And Florida was not that far behind them. They were 2.69. So goals for and goals against. So both of them obviously in the black because they're in the finals. But the Vegas offense was a little more lethal as a whole, whereas Florida has been leaning on Tkachuk to get a lot done. Before I slide into the next, I will bring up again on defense the save percentage. Florida has leaned hard on Bobrovsky, and he has a 9.35 save percentage. The team as a whole is at 9.3 because Bob didn't play every game. Vegas as a whole has a 9.2 save percentage. So that to me is a bigger thing as opposed to goals against. Is how many shots are you stopping? right? Because you could give up 2 goals a game, but if you're only giving up 14 shots, that's not good, right? So the stats are close. They kind of paint a picture that Vegas should win, but I'm not there yet. I think this is going to be drawn out. I don't think this ends in 5, maybe 6. It could go 7, but yeah, there's really not too much to split between these two teams.
Yeah, like one of the things initially when I look at these two teams, that could be a difference maker in terms of the series is, like I mentioned, Vegas has been exceptional in 5-on-5 situations, but they've also capitalized when they've had opportunities on the power play. When you look at the other way, on the other end of that spectrum, when you look at the Panthers, they've steadily and increasingly have got better on the penalty kill as the playoffs went on. They were getting murdered by Boston in that first series. I think they gave up like 11 power play goals, most of them in that first 3 games when they went down 3-0. When they got down in that series. But as the playoffs sort of rolled on, they've gotten better and better at killing off the penalties. I think they went 8 for 8 in their last penalty kill situations in that Eastern Conference Finals against Carolina after giving up 2 power play goals early on in the early stages of that series. So that's going to be important as well for Florida, because one of the things that has made them so good in the postseason is that this team is physical and this team tries to get into you. But along with that, sometimes can come picking up infractions, having to play a man down quite often because you get a little bit over aggressive. And now here comes picking up silly penalties. Kachuk that was a big problem in the beginning stage of his career, and even when he first got to Florida, that man spent just as much time in the box as he did on the ice, which is you can't help your team win when you're sitting behind the glass and they got to fight off a penalty. So that's going to be a big key to this series as well. Vegas doesn't need any help putting pucks in the back of the net. And so you got to be disciplined. You can't give up too many penalty opportunities or odd man situations for them to kind of really take advantage of you. And Florida has to continue, and Bob has to continue to be strong in net and keep them in these games, because one of the things that we've seen from Vegas in this postseason is when they get going downhill, they can put goals on you quickly. And a hockey game changes when you have to chase.
It does. It really, really does. And it can be played in different ways, right?
Mm-hmm.
You could be chasing the game even though you haven't given up any goals. You could be dictating the game even though you're losing.
Mm-hmm.
It's the weirdest thing about about hockey is that sometimes it doesn't really follow that narrative.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing about both these teams is the way they hem you in your zone, and they get you to a point where you kind of break. And again, we'll point to that Carolina series as an example. Florida just kept pushing and pushing and pushing, and every time they got Carolina to break, it was at kind of the most inopportune moments for Carolina, which is again why Brindamore's like, well, it was such a close series, you can't say it was a sweep. Sorry, buddy, you lost 4-0. But ultimately, you look at the battles that these teams have been through, and I think Florida having time to rest is going to be a bigger bonus for them, because you don't get through the Stanley Cup playoffs without nicks and cuts and bruises. And when you've had 5 or 6 days to kind of rest and relax, now you just unload on the team in front of
you. I can see that. But also one of the things that gives me pause for concern is when you look at how Florida has played. We didn't really talk too much about it because rest versus rust in the NBA Final Series, because we just felt like when you looked at those two teams and you looked at Denver has too much all to play for to really come out rusty. So that wasn't even something we even considered for the NBA Finals. For this series, though, when I look at the way the Panthers have played, I only am concerned at the beginning of this series, because I do think while it is a grueling schedule and it's a grueling time when you get to the NHL playoffs, I think having this many days off can affect your sharpness in terms of like being able to sort of maintain that forecheck in the offensive zone, being able to find those pockets in between, because like Chuck is really good at being able to kind of like those crisp pinpoint passes, and being able to get the puck in the slot. I think that having this many days off, I think that might affect them a little bit in terms of they were rolling in that series in terms of when they got scoring opportunities, they buried them. Sometimes when you have a little bit of a layoff, you find it a little bit harder to sort of create those sharp chances or put those sharp chances away. And that's one of the things that can get you in trouble with Vegas, is when you don't put them away, or you're getting caught on the back foot a little bit. They can kind of put 2 or 3 on you like Dallas did. Dallas never even got a chance in game 6 to even work their way into the game, because by the time they even blinked, they were already down 2-zip, 3-zip. So that's the only concern I have with Florida in game 1, is the combination of the pressure of the moment, being in Vegas. If you've ever been to a Golden Knights game, it's already in 5 or 6 years established itself as one of the more raucous places to play in the entire NHL. It's actually pretty fun, that environment. You can't hear yourself think before the puck drops, especially in big game situations. So I'm a little worried about if the layoff will affect their sharpness. But I tell you what, you are right in the fact that having this many days off will help them in terms of how physical they want to be. Because I know I can think of a guy like Sam Bennett off the top of my head, where that guy flies around the ice like a missile. I'm sure him having a few days to sort of rest up, he's going to be ready to knock some heads off right at the beginning of the game, like he did in the beginning of game 4, where he changed the entire atmosphere around that game 4 with that hit he had on I forget the guy's name, but he had a big hit right off the bat that really sort of changed the mood around that game in game 4 in the Eastern Conference Finals. So I think physically they're going to be ready. I just worry about if it will affect their sharpness having this many days off before the Cup Finals begin.
It might. And this is where being a younger team might hurt them. We talked about how Vegas has been there before with Marchessault, Stone, and Carlson, and then they added, Martinez, and then this season they brought in Quick. So they have 5 players that know what it means to be in the finals. 2 of them have won it, and what we're looking at in that sense is they're coming in prepared. They might have gone 6 and played against that Dallas team that kind of pushed them for 5 games. Yes, they were up 3-0, but they got some serious pushback before they dominated in game 6. So you've got coming off a battle test versus coming off of rest. And the question is who's going to make that big move first to steal momentum, right? You mentioned Bennett. It could be Tkachuk. Mm-hmm. As much as Matthew Tkachuk grinds my gears, mm-hmm. and he is somebody I despise because of everything he did to LA. And just the way he did things. He was, you know, you're talking Corey Perry, you're talking Brendan Lemieux, you're talking, we're gonna go back a whole bunch, Claude Lemieux in the 90s. There's so many. Here's a name that if anybody's listening, wants to go back. Esa Tikkanen.
Oh yeah.
Oh, you know.
Man, I know well. Yep.
Yes. Right. So he is that type of pest, right? And the older ones, the Tikkanen and the Claude, they would throw down and they would make you pay with a fist in your face. These current pests will make you pay with a puck in the net. And if Tkachuk gets going, he could be the one, because he kind of is the straw that stirs that drink. And so if he starts off on the right foot, he could push Florida. Now, on the other hand, you've got Vegas. Yeah, I could keep saying the same thing 100 different ways. But on the Florida side, it's Tkachuk and Bennett and how they set the tone. And on the Vegas side, it's just their control of the game and their emotions because they've been there. So those are the two big questions.
Because when you look at Vegas, right, one of the advantages they have over a lot of teams is they'll drop Carlson. Carlson will play on that third line with Riley Smith a lot. Like, when you could make the argument that you could flip-flop him and Chandler Stevenson and you could put him on the line with Stone and Howden and have those guys on the ice. But a lot of times, sometimes they do it mid-game where Carlson's now on the third line, and that really puts pressure on the opposing team because now there is just a constant flurry, no matter what line combination they put out, that they are just coming in waves and waves and waves, and it doesn't stop. And you will have a 4 or 5 minute stretch where it puts the opposing coach in a tough situation because you almost feel compelled to stretch out your top blue line out for longer periods of time because you're afraid if you make a change and the quality of defenders sort of drop down, and now Carlson is just he's got carte blanche out there, which is something they started doing with Dallas where there was no chance to breathe. Like they were just running lines in, and the pressure just stayed constant. And no matter how they wanted to play, whether it was dump and chase, whether they were just, really sort of controlling the puck and keeping it in your zone, they legitimately have 3 lines that there doesn't feel like there's any drop off in offensive quality. So it's a tough go. I'm with you. Like, the more we talk about it, the more you can sort of flip-flop how you may feel about the series when you get into one team versus the other. I just think that the question in this series is who is going to be that guy? And that's the question I'll pose to you. If I looked at you and I said, Florida wins because blank stepped up, not named Tkachuk, blank, whoever stepped up and just played out of his mind, who were you picking?
Ooh, man, that's loaded. I like it. I mean, I could run off a list, but I'll do it this way, right? If Bobrovsky stands on his head, Florida wins, right?
Yeah.
From the blue line, right? If they get some dominant performances, like we're talking, you were telling me off air, you were talking about how Montour just took his game to a different level.
Yeah.
Right. If he can find another level up, and I think he's paired with Ekblad, they're the top pair. That pairing could lead them to the next. And up front.
No, see, but here's what's funny though. They could have, right? and this will kind of sort of go into a point I was going to make about X factors or guys you may not be the first name that comes to mind, right? Montour has been incredible on both ends of the ice, but they've been able to separate him and Ekblad this postseason because Gustav Forsling has been so good and such a grinder that they'll take Montour and have him in that second defensive line, put Forsling with Ekblad, and then you're dropping Montour with Stahl with Mark Stahl. I always get the damn Stahl brothers mixed up because I always forget Florida has two of them. Mark Stahl, they'll pair him with Montour because you trust Mark Stahl to sort of hold that back line together while Montour is sort of getting involved in the offense, right? So Forsling has almost been a real linchpin for this team because he has had his nose in everything, which has taken pressure off of Montour and Ekblad and really helped them create two lines that you really trust.
Yes, and you kind of stole my thunder on that, but it's okay. That's okay. That blue line, though, when you have those two pairings, right, and you've got Radko Gudas on your third pairing,
yeah,
and just beating people up,
yeah, basically,
you're not worried about the back end. But that, for me, that would be the answer on the back end, right?
Yeah.
And now, I know you asked one, but I'm giving you three because for me, it's either coming out of the back, out of the net, it's coming from the decor, or if it's coming up top, Barkov and Bennett, and Verhaeghe have got to take their game to the next level. They have to. I'm looking at the scoring. Tkachuk is up there, and there's no one close in terms of the NHL scoring. Right now, and that when I looked at the points, it really made me kind of go, well, if you really want to be the team that is the team, you kind of need more, right? And let's point to some of these previous Cup winners, right? Yes, last year when Colorado won, they were led. It was all right there, right? But go back and point. You've got multiple people leading different teams. But if you look at Florida, Tkachuk has 21 points, right? Who's the next highest Panther? It's Verhaeghe with 15, and then it's Barkov with 14. Right? But look at Vegas. Right, Tkachuk has the second most points right now in all the playoffs. For Vegas, Jack Eichel, believe it or not, and how many times have you and I hammered on Jack Eichel needing to step up? He's got 18 points. Well, guess what? Marchessault's got 17. Stone has 15. Barbashev has 15. Carlson has 14. That is right there. How many players was that in the top 15? That's 5 or 6 in the top 15. Whereas Florida only has 2, 3. Sorry, Barkov is in there, but Barkov and Verhaeghe are so far down. So there is a disparity, and you need your other forwards to step up. You need someone not named Tkachuk to carry parts of the game, because Tkachuk won 3 of those games single-handedly, basically.
Yeah.
In the conference finals. So yes, to me, if Florida wins, Bobrovsky's gonna have to stand on his head. The defense is gonna have to continue to produce, and you need somebody not named Tkachuk in addition to him to step up. But I'll flip it to you now, and I'm going to ask you: Vegas wins if?
There are a few guys that I look at in this series in terms of what they are going to be asked to do in terms of their pairings and the guys they're going to be on the ice with. especially when you're talking about how Kachuk can wreck a game and some of the things that we know Verhaeghe can do. We know who Barkov is, right? And we know you got to have your head on the swivel when Sam Bennett's out on the ice. But when I look at Vegas and I look at what has made them successful in this postseason, it's some of those glue guys that aren't necessarily going to find the sheet, but they are sort of guys that are kind of the glue that sort of hold, that connect the first, the second, and those third lines together, right? When I look at a guy like Brett Howden, who is a guy that's never afraid to give up his body, right? And sort of mix things up and make life easier. And it's sort of kind of helped Mark Stone sort of transition pretty easy back into a role that the team needs him to do. Or even like a guy that I really love to watch, a guy like Chandler Stevenson. These are not the first names you're going to mention when you're talking about Vegas, but these are guys who are very important to what they want to do offensively. Those are guys that I look at, and I say like this: they have to step up because it's Florida. Because the thing about the Panthers that the Bruins learned, that the Maple Leafs learned, and Hurricanes learned is that these guys are coming, and they don't care because they understand that they aren't supposed to be here. For the love of God, the damn Columbus Blue Jackets probably cost themselves Connor Bedard winning a game that they shouldn't have, to help get Florida even to be here in the first place. So this is a team that understands they're playing with house money, so you are going to be under pressure the entire time. So again, a guy that you mentioned earlier, Alec Martinez, I'm looking at him, and he has to have his imprint on this game from the very beginning. Theodore has to have his. You have to hear his name mentioned all early and often in this game in terms of being able to really control the blue line and not letting Florida really get into their offense. And when I look at Aiden Hill, when Brousseau went down in that Oilers series, I thought they were in huge trouble. Like, I knew they had Jonathan Quick, but Jonathan Quick hadn't been there really long enough to where they clearly didn't feel like they could just thrust him in there. I don't even think he was active that night when Brousseau went down, and Aiden Hill was like the only guy they had. If he got hurt, they would have had to go find the guy who was riding the Zamboni in between the periods to go get a net for him. But this guy being thrust into that moment really has sort of really held that job down. And I'm sure it's a big help having Jonathan Quick on the bench to sort of kind of help guide you through this playoff run. So that definitely helps. So he's also a big key to this thing because there's going to be moments where he's going to have to make a crazy save because Kachuk is going to get loose. He just does. Everybody knows you have to keep him from in front of the net, and yet he finds himself there all the time. So that guy is going to be under pressure. And like I said at the very beginning of this thing, if that power play continues to play like it did in those last 3 games against Carolina, Florida will win this series. Because if Vegas is not able to take advantage of those opportunities when they come, I don't think that they can keep Florida off the board enough without taking advantage of those those odd man advantages. So it's the power play, it's Theodore, and some of those guys that are on the second and third lines that are going to have to sort of be the glue in between with Marchessault and Stone and those guys that and Eichel and quite frankly, let's have a conversation real quick about Jack Eichel. You are in a position right now. If magically these words that are coming out of my mouth reach you, you are in a position right now to put a debate to bed, whether it's vain or not, in terms of how you really feel about him versus his counterpart up in Edmonton. That guy's got all the stats, but you have a chance to be the first one to lift the cup, which is ultimately the tiebreaker, no matter how you feel about McDavid versus Eichel when those guys went 1-2. He has disappeared at times in this postseason, and it has been, and it hasn't been a point of conversation because of what Marchessault and Carlson and Barbashev and some of these guys have done in the postseason. They've scored so much that it's been easy to lose sight of the fact that, he hasn't really played as well as you would expect him. He won't be able to get away with that in this series because, like we keep talking about with Florida, they don't care. And this is found money, them even being in this position. So he has got to step up more than anybody else in this series.
Yeah. And the big Jack Eichel note, right? He has to be more involved. I'm not saying he has to be like Kachuk and be the one who drives the play, right? But he can't disappear. If Vegas is going to win the cup, Jack Eichel cannot disappear. I pointed to the fact that he is 5th in points with 18, right? But I think he got a lot of that against Edmonton.
Mm-hmm.
He was very hit and miss against Dallas, and that was a gripe you and I had in that series. So he cannot repeat that performance if he wants to be a cup champion in 10 days, 2 weeks, however long this series goes. But that's in that sense, he's kind of an X factor, right? Where he needs to win. He needs to be present and he needs to play. He needs to do Jack Eichel things. And I agree with you. As much as Connor is, Jesus, it's kind of how you are when you say heat culture. As much as he is in that vein, right? He is essentially a modern day Wayne Gretzky, a modern day Mario Lemieux. There hasn't been anybody like them since, and now you've got Connor.
Yeah.
And so he's great, but he doesn't have his name on the cup.
Yeah.
He hasn't hoisted that baby over his head. And if Eichel can show up, he gets to be the first one out of that draft from those two to do it. And it's a little bit of bragging rights. Now, it takes me to the manufactured rivalry between Sid and Ovi because it never really existed, the Sid and Ovechkin rivalry. It didn't exist until they faced each other in the playoffs, right? Because then there was two captains trying to lead their team and going head-to-head. Up until then, it wasn't really a rivalry. Sid had the cups. Ovechkin didn't have anything. But that was the whole question in the beginning, right? Well, Sid got cups. Where's Ovi's? And Ovechkin's supposed to be, he is, right? But another reason why hockey is such an ultimate team sport, you had McDavid and Draisaitl dominating the power plays. They are still number 3 and number 4 in points throughout the entire playoffs. And Draisaitl still leads the NHL in goals.
Yeah. Which tells you how ridiculous he was in this postseason.
Yeah. So again, if Eichel can be the key cog like he has been in the first 2 rounds, I think he gives himself a great chance to lift that cup.
Yeah.
But yeah, to wrap all that up, he cannot disappear. Simple as that. Okay, so we will take it home, but first, let's get your predictions.
Man, in preparing for this podcast for the last couple of days, I've been haggling numbers and going back and watching these two teams, and it is evident that we do have the two teams who have played the best in the Stanley Cup final. There's no fluke with how we got here with these two teams. They absolutely throw the records out, just what they have done in the postseason. These are the two most consistent teams in terms of what they have done on both ends of the ice in the postseason to get here. With that being said, I just think that this has been 6 years in the making when you look at what Vegas has done, the pieces they have added, the sort of cornerstones that they even began to build this franchise around. I think that this is going to be a crowning moment for this organization, because I don't know, in terms of like when you look at age and you look at the way the salary cap is structured, I don't know how long this run lasts with this particular group. I think that this is an opportunity for them to go ahead and put the rubber stamp on everything that this organization has built through the first 6 years. And I am going to go Vegas in an epic Stanley Cup, and it's going to go 7 games. I'm going Vegas in 7.
I cannot say without trying to throw myself off a building, just because there's been this immense just anti-Vegas uprising internally after everything that's happened. So the pure fan in me says no to Vegas, right? But we're not just doing this from a fan perspective. I mean, yeah, I'm 100% a Kings fan first, but as a hockey fan and as somebody who really enjoys it, and we're over here analyzing and breaking down what's going on, I have to give you a mostly unbiased kind of answer. So I'll say it like this: the Kings fan in me says Florida in 6, and I want to hold on to that. But that depends. If Florida takes game 1, it's Florida in 6. If Florida doesn't win game 1 or 2, it's Vegas in 7. And I know here I am, I'm hedging, I'm giving it to different answers. But I'm talking to you as, fan perspective and legitimate perspective. Fan perspective, I want Florida. I don't care if it's 4, 5, 6, or 7. But yeah, if Florida takes a game, they can do it in 6. But I think ultimately Vegas is a little deeper, and that puts Vegas in 7. So with that, hope you enjoyed us going back and forth, my distractions notwithstanding. We try to put these out for you as often as we can. So thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Thank you for spending time with us. And we will have some updates. I mean, there's some news in the NBA. The finals are going on, but hey, there are some coaching hires. And even in the NHL, you got the Cup Finals, but there are some GM movements happening. So there are some things for us to update you on. We will keep bringing these out, and keep watching, keep hitting the like button if you do, subscribe, hit the bell notification, and again, just thank you.
Yeah, I mean, we do our best to keep the content cranking it out for you guys. Like I said, we've covered the finals for the NBA and the NHL. We do intend to at some point we're going to break down a lot of the off-season movement in the NFL. We've already sort of covered stuff with MLB, and there'll be more of that content coming, especially when Arshavir's team and my team have big series coming up this weekend with Mets and the Blue Jays and Dodgers, Yankees, and the uncivil war has its newest chapter. So there'll be plenty of content coming for you guys. But as always, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. We're going to keep bringing this stuff to you. Peace.